My name is Lucas Bennett, and I can pinpoint the exact moment my father decided I was no longer part of the family. It was a Wednesday afternoon, around 3:30 p.m., when my phone buzzed with a notification that would eventually ignite 48 hours of chaos. Don't bother coming to the anniversary party. We're done with you. 5 words. No greeting, no signature. Not even a passive-aggressive flourish like, "Hope you're happy now." I read the text while standing in the glass-walled conference room of the firm I'd sacrificed the last decade of my life to. Behind me, the skyline of Chicago looked like a circuit board, each window another tiny, glowing universe where people probably had normal fathers who didn't consider their children a line item on a balance sheet. For a second, I thought it was a joke, some autocorrect mishap. But no, it was exactly the kind of sterile message my father, Richard Bennett, would send. If he could have legally disowned me via emoji, he would have. I slipped the phone into my pocket and turned back to my assistant, who was waiting patiently with a stack of contracts. "Everything okay, Mr. Bennett?" she asked, her voice cautious. "Fine," I lied. "Let's keep going." Because that was what you did when you were a Bennett, you ignored the fire in your life and focused on the next bullet point. It wasn't until hours later, when I was back in my apartment, that I really let the words settle in. Don't bother coming. We're done with you. It was almost funny. My father had spent my entire life dangling acceptance in front of me like a discount carrot. Be more like your brother, be less sensitive, work harder, don't outshine him too much, but don't be a failure either. I'd contorted myself in 1,000 ways to try to fit inside the ever-shifting mold. The first time I realized that effort was doomed was when I was 14. I'd been accepted into a summer program at Northwestern, 2 weeks of academic bliss away from the constant comparisons. I came home waving the acceptance letter like it was a lottery ticket. My father didn't even look up from his laptop. "That's nice," he said. "But Brandon got accepted to the state basketball camp." As if that explained everything. As if the fact that my older brother could dribble a ball was somehow worth more than anything I could do. So when I read that text, I didn't feel hurt. I felt relief. But the kind of relief you feel after realizing you've been trying to win a rigged game your whole life. I picked up the phone again and scrolled to the only contact who knew exactly how entangled I was in the family business. Alex Carter, my lawyer, my best friend, and the only person who'd ever told me I wasn't crazy for thinking my father treated me like a disposable asset. He answered on the second ring. "You finally ready?" he asked, no preamble necessary. "Yeah," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Pull everything. The guarantee, the credit line, the indemnity clause. I want my name off every document connected to Bennett and Sons." There was a pause, the kind you get from a friend who cares more about you than your pride. "You know this is going to get ugly," Alex said quietly. "I know," I said. "And you're okay with that?" I swallowed, remembering the night 3 years ago when my father slid a loan guarantee across my kitchen table. "It's just a formality," he'd said in his patronizing baritone. "The bank likes to see the whole family committed. It'll be good for your image." Translation: "You're going to sign this because you owe me." I'd signed it. Of course I had. Because saying no meant proving him right, that I was ungrateful, selfish, a liability. 3 years later, I finally understood that the only person I'd betrayed was myself. "I'm okay with it," I said, my chest tight with something that felt almost like freedom. "All right," Alex said. "I'll file the notices in the morning." When I hung up, I was alone in the quiet of my living room. No angry voices. No disappointed sighs. Just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant noise of the city carrying on without me. I knew it wouldn't stay quiet for long. My father would see the guarantee withdrawal by mid-morning, and then the calls would start. But for that one night, I felt the weight slip off my shoulders, like I'd finally stopped holding up something that was never really mine. I poured a glass of whiskey, sat by the window, and let the realization sink in. My father was right about one thing. I wasn't coming back. Morning came with a vengeance. At precisely 8:02 a.m., my phone lit up with a call from an unfamiliar number. I didn't answer. 2 minutes later, a text arrived. "Lucas, this is Gregory Clark." Your father asked me to call. We need to discuss your obligations regarding the credit line. Obligations. As if I were an employee who'd missed a memo instead of the son who'd been pressured into personally guaranteeing a multi-million-dollar loan for a business I had zero control over. I didn't reply. At 8:30, my mother's number appeared on the screen. I watched it ring and ring, the old reflex to pick up still tugging at my hand. But I knew what she'd say. Lucas, please be reasonable. You're making your father upset. As if my entire existence hadn't been one long exercise in tiptoeing around his moods. At 9:05, the real onslaught began. My father called. I muted the ringer and turned the phone face down. He called again at 9:10, then at 9:15, each attempt a predictable escalation. At 9:20, I received a text. Answer your phone. You have no idea what you're doing. I almost laughed. If he knew how many nights I'd sat in this same apartment, replaying the moment I signed that loan guarantee, if he knew how many times I'd wished I'd had the courage to say no, he'd understand that I knew exactly what I was doing. At 9:45, a second text arrived, this time from Brandon. Dude. Seriously? The bank called Dad. You can't just pull your name. You're tanking everything. That was Brandon in a nutshell. Everything was a game of optics and damage control. I read it once and deleted it. By 10:30, Alex called. They're in meltdown mode, he said, sounding both amused and exasperated. Tell me something I don't know. Your father's CFO called my office. They want you to reconsider your position. I'm sure they do. And, Alex continued, Gregory Clark left me a voicemail. They're threatening to sue you for breach of fiduciary duty. That was so absurd I actually laughed. I don't have fiduciary duty, I said. I'm not on the board. I'm not even an employee. I know, Alex said calmly. But you understand this isn't about winning a lawsuit. It's about scaring you. I rubbed my eyes. And if that doesn't work? Then they'll escalate. There was a silence, the kind that sits heavy between old friends. Are you ready for this, Lucas? He asked, voice softer. I thought about the last decade of my life, of every Thanksgiving dinner where I was interrogated about my loyalty, of every time my mother said, You know how your father is, as if that excused everything. Yes, I said. I'm ready. At noon, my father finally left a voicemail. I played it on speaker while I chopped vegetables for lunch, just to see if the sound of his voice still did what it used to, make me feel 14 and small and apologetic. Lucas, he began, his voice carefully measured. I'm going to assume you're acting out of ignorance rather than malice. You have no idea the damage you're causing. The bank is questioning our solvency. The partners are panicking. This is not just about you. This is about the entire family. About the company that built everything you have. I set the knife down and leaned against the counter. He paused, and for a second, I almost expected him to say something real. But instead, he finished with, You have 24 hours to retract your notice. After that, don't expect this to end well. I ended the message and took a slow breath. There it was, the threat beneath the civility, the promise that he'd burn everything down rather than admit he'd pushed too far. I turned my phone off and tossed it onto the couch. For the rest of the day, I worked in blessed silence. By the time evening rolled around, I felt steadier. I knew the calls wouldn't stop. I knew he'd come at me from every angle. But for the first time, the idea didn't make my chest seize up. That night, I poured a glass of whiskey and sat by the window, looking out at the glittering grid of the city. They thought I'd fold because I always had. They didn't realize that the only reason I'd stayed quiet this long was because I hadn't been ready to walk away. Now I was ready. Saturday morning, the second wave of attacks began. It started with a knock on my apartment door. I knew before I looked who it would be. My mother had always preferred showing up unannounced, as though proximity could smother a disagreement into submission. I stood in the entryway for a moment, considering pretending I wasn't home. But in the end, I opened the door. She was there in her pale pink cashmere wrap, makeup perfect, expression solemn. Lucas, she said, voice soft with rehearsed sorrow. May I come in? No, I said just as softly. She blinked, clearly not prepared for a direct refusal. This isn't how we solve things, she began, smoothing the wrap over her shoulders. I'm not interested in solving things, I said. I'm interested in being done with them. Her lips pressed into a thin line. You're behaving like a child. I felt an old, familiar tug in my chest. That was her favorite script: if you didn't comply, you were immature. If you stood your ground, you were cruel. You know what's childish? I asked, leaning one shoulder against the doorframe. Expecting your son to co-sign a multi-million-dollar loan and then act surprised when he decides he's tired of being collateral. Her eyes flicked away. Your father did what he thought was best for the company. No, I said, voice low. He did what was best for himself. He always has. She took a breath, like she was going to launch into another monologue, but I cut her off. I'm not coming back, I said. She looked up sharply. Back to what? To pretending, I said. Pretending this family is something it isn't. The silence stretched between us, and I saw something flicker across her face, a crack in the careful mask. For a second, she looked exactly as tired as I felt. Then she smoothed the wrap again and straightened her spine. You'll regret this, she said, voice brittle. Maybe, I said, stepping back into the apartment. But at least it'll be my choice. I closed the door gently. And this time, I didn't feel the need to apologize. 20 minutes later, my phone lit up with another text, Brandon this time. You've really lost it. Mom came home in tears. The bank is threatening to freeze the line of credit. Are you happy now? I didn't answer. Instead, I forwarded the message to Alex with a single line. They're unraveling, he replied a moment later. Good. They should be. At noon, I tried to distract myself by reorganizing my kitchen cabinets. Anything to keep my hands busy while my brain replayed all the ways this could explode. That's when the email came in. From Gregory Clark. Subject: urgent, personal guarantee. Lucas, I have been instructed to advise you that if you do not reinstate your guarantee within 48 hours, Bennett and Sons will pursue all legal remedies available. Furthermore, your father is prepared to make public statements regarding your conduct and motivations. Regards, Gregory Clark. I stared at the screen, equal parts exhausted and amused. Public statements. As if I were a politician caught embezzling, not a son finally setting boundaries. I closed the email and poured myself a glass of water. The longer this went on, the more obvious it became that my father only had two tools: intimidation and shame. And neither worked anymore. At 3 p.m., Alex called. I've reviewed the letter, he said. It's bluff. They have no grounds to sue you. Doesn't mean they won't try, I said. They can try, Alex said calmly. We'll bury them in countersuits. You have nothing to worry about legally. I exhaled, feeling a knot in my chest loosen. Thanks, I said. You sure you're okay? He asked. I thought about the night I signed that guarantee. About the way my father had clapped me on the shoulder like I was a loyal employee instead of a son. I'm better than okay, I said. That evening, I turned my phone off again. I made dinner, real dinner, not takeout. Pasta with roasted vegetables. A bottle of red wine. Halfway through eating, I realized it was the first meal in years I hadn't eaten with one eye on my phone, waiting for the next crisis. It tasted better than any peace offering my father had ever pretended to extend. Sunday dawned gray and cold, which felt appropriate. I woke to find 18 missed calls and 4 voicemails stacked like angry little dominoes. I didn't listen to any of them. Instead, I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, scrolling headlines on my laptop like a person whose life wasn't quietly detonating. Around 9 a.m., Alex texted. Just FYI, they've retained outside counsel. Looks like they're serious about filing something. It's still nonsense, I replied. Let them. At 10, the doorbell rang. I didn't have to look to know it was Brandon. He always showed up in person when he thought he could be the reasonable one. Sure enough, when I opened the door, he was standing there in a Patagonia vest, holding 2 paper cups of coffee like a peace offering. Dude, He sighed. This is ridiculous. Hello to you too, I said. Can I come in? No. He shifted the cups from one hand to the other. You're really not going to talk to me? You're talking right now. He exhaled, like I was being intentionally difficult. Look, I get that you're pissed. Dad shouldn't have pressured you. But you pulling your name? You're blowing up the whole company. You know that, right? I crossed my arms. You mean the company I have no stake in? You have a stake because you're part of this family. He snapped. No, I said calmly. I was part of this family. Then he texted me to say I wasn't. Brandon ran a hand over his neatly trimmed beard, searching for the right script. Can we not do this? He tried, lowering his voice. Mom's a wreck. Dad is, well, you know how he is. You're proving a point, okay, but at what cost? I leaned against the doorframe. At the cost of my own peace, I said. Which is overdue. His jaw flexed. You're unbelievable. That's what you all liked about me, I said lightly. I was very believable. I believed every excuse, every lie, every demand dressed up as duty. I'm done. I started to close the door, but he stepped forward. Lucas. I held up a hand. You should go, I said, softer than I expected. He didn't argue. He just turned and walked back to the elevator, coffee still in hand. I closed the door. And instead of feeling triumphant, I felt sad. Because no matter how toxic it was still my family. But sadness wasn't the same as regret. At noon, Alex called. They've drafted the first version of the complaint, he said. It's flimsy. They're alleging you had a familial fiduciary obligation. That's not a real thing, by the way. I know, I said. But they're trying to scare you. Yeah, I said, looking out the window at the January sky. And it won't work. I could hear the smile in his voice. That's why I like representing you. By late afternoon, my phone was blessedly silent. I used the time to clean my apartment. I organized the kitchen drawers, scrubbed the bathroom tiles, vacuumed the rugs. It was the most peaceful day I'd had in years. When the sun started to set, I made dinner again, roast chicken and potatoes, and ate at my table with the radio playing quietly. I thought of my father, pacing his office, furious that I hadn't called to explain myself. I thought of my mother, telling herself she'd done everything she could. I thought of Brandon, rehearsing new arguments for next time. And I felt something I hadn't expected, relief. Because even if this turned into the legal circus Alex predicted, I finally knew who I was without them. And it turned out I liked him. Monday morning, my phone was already lighting up before I'd had my first sip of coffee. I didn't answer. At 8:15, an email landed in my inbox with the subject line, Important, family meeting. I opened it because curiosity is my worst habit. It was from my father's assistant, drafted like a corporate memo. Lucas, you are requested to attend a meeting with Richard Bennett and Gregory Clark to discuss your recent withdrawal of the personal guarantee. Time Tuesday, 7 p.m. Location, the Conrad Hotel, Executive Suite. Please confirm attendance. I closed the email without replying. At 9, Alex called. They're trying to set a trap, he said without preamble. I know, I said. They want you on their turf so they can badger you in person. Maybe intimidate you into signing something. I figured. Alex paused. Are you planning to go? Yes, I said. There was a beat of quiet. Then I'm coming too, he said. You don't have to. Lucas, he interrupted. They've underestimated you your whole life. That doesn't mean I will. I exhaled. All right. The rest of the day passed in a strange hush. No more calls. No more doorbell ambushes. Just an unnatural quiet that felt like the moment before a storm breaks. By evening, my phone finally buzzed again. A text from my mother. Please. Don't do this. I didn't reply. Tuesday dawned cold and clear. I went to work. I signed documents. I sat through meetings where I contributed exactly as much as necessary and no more. By 5, I was back home, sitting at my kitchen table staring at a legal pad where I'd scribbled everything I needed to say. I knew it wouldn't matter. People like my father didn't care about the truth. They cared about the performance, about making sure no one saw the cracks. At 6:30, Alex picked me up. He wore a dark suit and the expression he reserved for depositions and shareholder wars. "You ready?" he asked as I buckled my seatbelt. "As I'll ever be," I said. When we reached the hotel, the concierge escorted us up to the executive suite. The door opened to reveal my father standing in front of the fireplace, arms folded across his chest. Gregory Clark was seated at the table, a thick file in front of him. My mother sat near the window, her hands clutched in her lap like she was bracing for impact. Brandon wasn't there. For once, he'd found a conflict he wanted no part of. "Lucas," my father said without looking at me. "Sit." I didn't. Instead, I stepped just far enough into the room to let the door swing shut behind me. "You wanted to talk," I said. "Talk." Gregory cleared his throat. "Mr. Bennett, your withdrawal of the guarantee has caused significant harm. The bank is considering recalling the entire credit facility. This could trigger defaults across multiple lines. We are prepared to pursue damages." I glanced at Alex, who raised one eyebrow as if to say these idiots really thought this was a threat. "You can file whatever you want," Alex said coolly. "Nothing will stick." My father finally turned to look at me, and the fury in his eyes was so familiar it almost felt like coming home. "You have no idea the damage you've done," he said, voice low. "You've embarrassed me. You've endangered everything we built." "You built," I corrected. "I was never given a choice to be part of it." He stepped closer. "You are part of it. Whether you like it or not. Your name is Bennett." For a long time, that meant I didn't have a choice, I said. My voice was steady, even though my hands were shaking. "But I've realized something." "I do." My mother made a small noise, somewhere between a sob and a gasp. "You'll regret this," my father said. "Maybe," I said. "But that's my risk to take." Gregory shifted uncomfortably. Alex straightened a stack of papers he'd brought and set them on the table. "These are formal notices confirming Mr. Bennett's revocation of the guarantee and indemnifying him of any liability," he said. "You can accept them, or you can spend the next 2 years losing in court." No one moved. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one waiting to be told what happened next. I was the one deciding. The silence in that hotel suite stretched so long it stopped feeling tense and started feeling absurd. My father was still standing by the fireplace, gripping the mantel like he might rip it off the wall. My mother kept dabbing her eyes with a tissue she hadn't actually used. Gregory Clark looked at his expensive watch, as if he'd rather be anywhere else. Finally, my father spoke, voice sharp as broken glass. "You've always thought you were better than this family." I didn't answer. He took a step toward me, his jaw tight. "You've never understood sacrifice. Responsibility. You think your success happened in a vacuum?" I almost laughed. "Yes. That's exactly where it happened. In the hours you spent ignoring me and the decades you spent telling me I wasn't enough." His nostrils flared. "You're selfish." Alex cleared his throat. "Mr. Bennett." But I held up a hand. "No," I said quietly. "Let him say it." My father's gaze didn't waver. "You want to be free? Fine. But don't expect to come crawling back when you realize you're alone." It didn't hit like it used to. Maybe because it wasn't new. Maybe because I was tired of pretending it was ever my job to hold his empire together. "I won't be crawling anywhere," I said. Gregory finally cleared his throat. "Lucas, if you refuse to sign a reinstatement of the guarantee, we have no choice but to proceed." "Then proceed," Alex said flatly. There was another long pause. My mother's voice wavered. "Please. Just think about what you're doing. You're destroying the company. Your father's reputation was never my job to protect," I finished. My father turned away. Alex placed the final set of documents on the table, formal letters withdrawing any consent, any signatures, any illusions that I'd ever been anything but a pawn. "This is your copy," he told Gregory. Consider yourselves served. We left them there, frozen in that too bright suite. On the elevator down, my legs were shaking. Alex didn't say anything. He just reached over and rested a hand on my shoulder. When we hit the lobby, I finally exhaled. You okay? He asked. I nodded. Yeah. And it was true. For the first time, I felt something close to clean. That night, I went home, turned my phone off, and sat in the quiet. I expected regret to creep in, but it didn't. The next morning, I woke to find that my father had made good on his final threat. An email blast had gone out to the extended family. Subject: Lucas's betrayal. It was a self-pitying manifesto. A play-by-play of how I had abandoned them, how I had attacked the very people who made him, and how I was choosing ego over loyalty. I read the entire thing with the same curiosity you'd bring to a gossip column. And then, for the first time in a very long time, I laughed. Because he'd finally said the truth out loud. He thought I owed him everything. And now, he was learning that I didn't owe him anything at all. By midweek, the fallout was in full swing. First came the phone calls from extended relatives. Most were variations of the same theme. Lucas, can't you just sit down with your father? Lucas, think about your mother. Lucas, do you really want to be the reason the company goes under? And the best one, courtesy of my Aunt Sharon. Lucas, it's not too late to apologize. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I forwarded every voicemail to Alex. You know, he said when he called later, most people would be unraveling right now. I'm not most people. I said. No, he agreed, voice dry. You're much harder to intimidate. Thursday, the official paperwork arrived. 2 thick envelopes slid under my door. One was from my father's attorney, threatening to sue for damages. The second was a cease and desist letter claiming my actions constituted defamation. I read both on my kitchen counter while eating toast. When I finished, I set them aside and texted Alex. They're trying everything. He replied immediately. Let them. It won't hold up. That night, as if scripted, Brandon called again. I let it ring. When he texted, it was exactly what I expected. You've proven your point. Now grow up. That was the difference between us. He thought this was about proving something. It wasn't. It was about leaving. Friday morning, I called Rebecca, my cousin, the only one in the family who'd ever admitted it wasn't normal to live under Dad's thumb. She picked up on the second ring. Wow, she said. You're alive. More alive than I've ever been. I said. Good. Because the family group chat is a dumpster fire. Let it burn. I said. She laughed. I can't believe you actually did it. I can't, I said. And I realized I meant it. That evening, I came home to another email from my father's lawyer, this time requesting a mediation session. I didn't reply. Instead, I poured a drink and watched the city lights flicker on. For years, I thought that walking away would feel like failure. But all it felt like was relief. At midnight, I finally turned my phone back on. There was one last message waiting, shorter than all the others. From my father. You'll regret this. I stared at it a long time. Then I deleted it. Because regret was the one thing I no longer had room for. A week later, the quiet finally settled in. Not because my father had given up, he hadn't. But because I'd stopped waiting for the next strike. Somewhere in that stretch of sleepless nights and legal letters, I'd realized something obvious. He wasn't going to change. And I didn't have to keep hoping he would. Alex called on a rainy Wednesday to tell me the last of the threats were officially idle. They're posturing, he said. The complaints won't go anywhere. Then let them posture, I said. I could hear the smile in his voice. You did it. It only took 37 years, I said dryly. He laughed. You're free. Free. It felt almost too big a word. That weekend I packed a small bag and drove out of the city. No destination. No schedule. Just a borrowed cabin near Lake Geneva where the air smelled like pine and the phone signal was unreliable. For 2 days I sat by the water reading, cooking simple meals, sleeping when I felt like it. No buzzing phone. No carefully worded emails. No family demanding I sacrifice another piece of myself for their comfort. On Sunday night I sat on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders and watched the last light fade off the lake. I thought about everything that had happened. The moment I signed the guarantee. The moment I unsignaled my compliance. The night in the hotel suite when I finally told my father no. And I felt, okay. Not triumphant. Not bitter. Just done. When I drove back into the city Monday morning, I knew exactly what I had to do next. I opened my email, found the draft resignation letter I'd been tinkering with for months, and sent it. Not to my employer. To the Bennett family group chat. Subject: closure. Family. I'm sure you've all heard your preferred version of the story by now. Here's mine. I did what I had to do. I don't regret it. I don't expect you to understand. I don't need you to. I wish you all peace. Please do not contact me further. Lucas. I closed my laptop and exhaled. Minutes later, my phone buzzed with Brandon's number. I didn't answer. Then my mother's number. I silenced it. And when my father's name finally appeared, I turned the phone off altogether. That evening, I poured a glass of wine and stood by the window, watching the city in all its indifferent glory. I thought about how many years I'd spent wanting to belong. And how good it felt to finally belong to myself. I knew there would be days I'd second-guess this choice. Days when I'd wonder if there was something else I could have said or done to change him. But deep down, I knew better. You can't negotiate with someone who sees your worth as a function of your obedience. And I was done being obedient. As the last of the sunset slipped behind the skyline, I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a kid. Hope. Hope that the life ahead of me was mine to build, without anyone else's permission. And for the first time in a long, long time, that was enough.